afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, welcome. We made a lot of preparation for today's meeting, so I hope it will go smoothly. 60 minutes, packed agenda. So let me just scroll down on here. It is 2 o'clock. I'll hand over to Mark. Mark, you've got your forward, please.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, however we find ourselves. Apologies for my croaky voice. As I said to those of you on the call slightly earlier, it's from supporting England to its glorious defeat, and wasn't unfortunately enough. But there we go. I haven't really got anything more to say except looking forward to good healthy discussion, and hopefully InterManager can take a position on these various key issues on vaccination, because I think they're important, and I think there is a wider vaccination discussion and debate out there than just are they vaccinated or not, how do they get vaccinated, and how do we do that. So really looking forward to the debate.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask everybody who's not speaking to make sure that your mic is muted? Got a terrible feedback. Maybe Ola, that's you because you joined recently. And Maciek, I think Maciek, you are not muted. Could you please mute yourself?
Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Oh, yes, indeed. We had a discussion with Mark, and we really need to squeeze as much as possible and allow as much time possible for the discussion. Update from me. Obviously, I was on holiday last week. Therefore, I wasn't really working on InterManager issues except making sure that we are ready for this week and next week. Therefore, I hope you have seen my message, which I sent yesterday. Thank you all 64% of you who responded and made my life much easier. That was a survey where 3 weeks ago now, we asked a question saying, what do you think about the shore leaves? And I hope you have seen that 86% of our members, full members, responded, yes, we are happy for the shore leaves, providing they are risk assessed. 14% went blanket no. Comments from those who said no were usually, but we provide something for the seafarers so they don't really need to go ashore, which is connection, communication, good well-being, and so on and so forth. Employment of unvaccinated seafarers. Majority, 93% of our members came back and said, we strongly recommend and encourage seafarers to get vaccinated, but we are not forcing them, if I may use this word, except 7%. 7% of our members said no vaccination, no employment. And then there was a question regarding vaccination in port, and vaccination in port was, interestingly for me, and people, those who vaccinated, especially in US, seafarers, 80% for the full. Now, Alex, could you mute your phone microphone, please? Alex, you're not muted, and I hear what's happening. Yeah, thank you. And 20% went 50-50, which means seafarers were vaccinated one day and then 50% another. Now, Rad, you are not muted. I expect from you. So these were the statistics which should help us. We had also, because we posted on the social media, I still have Rajesh, could you please mute yourself?
Yeah, just a moment. Yes.
Thank you. Social media, seafarers were very interested in our discussion as well, and they provided feedback. And what they were saying basically was that shipmasters were in real pickle. They've got a pressure from everywhere, but also from below, which means also from crew, especially unvaccinated crew, who says, please do not send others ashore or allow them ashore because I will get sick. And if I get sick, I will not be earning money, and so on and so forth. What we found, we also had a meeting, shipping partners had a meeting last week when we were talking about shore leaves. And what was really very interesting out of it was that every organization is very happy to provide guidelines. And that's probably what organizations can do. We cannot give orders, we cannot give regulations. As Mark pointed out, maybe we can come to the position, and it would be really good, obviously position which somebody may agree or disagree, but it will probably be very comfortable for some organizations to say, I am following what the industry says, and my industry is ship management, and that's what we collectively agreed is the best way. Some people may say, but I disagree. I still disagree. But I think what is happening, giving guidelines for those who are at the sharp end, is not necessarily very helpful. In a way, then they cannot meet all the requirements in the guidelines and not have a COVID. Very interestingly, I don't think we've got anybody on a call today from Intertanko, but Phil have kindly sent me Intertanko position on shore leaves, and it's a very interesting one, which I will forward to all of us. I've just received it, so I didn't manage yet. And the position basically is 5 points, and shore leaves allowed, but if anybody goes ashore, will be treated as a new joiner, and when joins the ship again on coming back from shore, has to be quarantined for 2 weeks on board of a ship and eat separately and so on and so forth. So basically, yes, you can go, but then you will be separated. And I don't know how physically it is possible to separate, quarantine somebody on board. So in my opinion, it's a strong position, no shore leaves. Yeah, however, if you want to go, this is what's happening. So this is update from me. You also should have received my message. Now, I believe I would like to hear, I'm just checking my schedule. Hold on a second, because I'm juggling between screens, please. So Kuba was giving his presentation and his update. Vaccination of seafarers, that will be discussed. COVID travel situation, I've got absolutely no update on that. Questions I've answered. And now I would suggest we move forward our guest speaker, Natalie, and listen to ICS and industry, not only from me, but from ICS point of view. And then when Natalie finishes, we go back to Mark, and then we'll have a discussion after hearing what I was just saying and what Natalie has to say. Because also remember, we wanted to discuss the education, realizing the fact that some of our seafarers, especially from Ukraine and Poland, by the look of it, are very reluctant to get vaccinated. And it is a problem which Mark has highlighted and shouted out. Then we may end up having 30% or whatever percentage we may have of people who will be reluctant to get vaccinated, and we will need to deal with this issue. So Natalie, I know you're on a call. Are you ready to take us to your presentation?
Thank you, Kuba. And I'm really going to just highlight a few points. But what I really wanted to do was to hear from your members about some of the challenges they faced, and then perhaps I can give them some advice or some comments on what we're trying to do about those things internationally. So I didn't want it to be a death by PowerPoint afternoon. I wanted it to be a practical discussion to really understand what the issues are at the sharp end, but also to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing at the other end. And I'm sure most of you will know, but and this is probably repeating something I said a few weeks ago, but since the start of the pandemic, ICS has produced a number of materials in relation to COVID-19, and certainly in latter months we've produced those in combination with a number of other industry organisations to try to make sure that they are disseminated as widely as possible amongst the industry and the industry groups. We've also tried to work where possible with other organisations or people who are trying to do work, and I know I've been working with Stephen sort of in terms of some of the video tail work that they've been doing on vaccinations, but we've also produced an ICS vaccination video, if you like, short clip for seafarers to try to reassure them, as well as a vaccination leaflet. Interestingly enough, I'm sure Kuba shared with you, but we've asked our companies to complete a questionnaire with regard to vaccinations. To date, I think we've had about 119 companies that have responded, and that survey closes at the weekend. So if your company hasn't done it, please I'm sure Cuba can remind you of a link, but please do complete that, because the better picture, it will help us with our lobbying to explain where things are going well and where things are going less well from the company's perspective. So we can sit in our ivory towers and think we know what's going on, but at the end of the day, it's you guys at the sharp end who actually face the challenges on a daily basis and know where you're getting good support and where you're not getting good support. In terms of the vaccination leaflet, it is available to download from icsshipping.org. I think in the survey results that we looked at last week, although we will obviously relook at it this week, about 92% of companies who responded to the questionnaire said that they had used it, had disseminated it to their seafarers, which I think is probably the highest response we've ever had to any publication actually being shared and disseminated. So that is encouraging, and we will be updating that document in September. So if there are any specific questions which are not in that document that seafarers have been raising with you as companies as to why they're reluctant to be vaccinated, or particular issues, please send them through to Cuba, who will then send them through to me, and we will add those into the Q's and A's from the doctors to try to give people reassurance and gradually try to reduce that state of ignorance out there with regard to vaccinations. We all know there's a lot of myths and stuff. On a positive note, I think most seafarers, from our understanding, are actually very keen on wanting to get vaccinated. Some of the challenges we're hearing are it's actually that some companies are reluctant to get their seafarers vaccinated and would prefer to have them vaccinated at home rather than having them vaccinated while they're on board. That's certainly not what we would advocate. Having spoken to the medics in the International Maritime Health Association, their view is the sooner we can get people vaccinated, the better we have to try to secure the health and safety of our crews whilst they're travelling around the world. So again, if that's your company's perspective, you know, that's yours. That's obviously your prerogative, but that's not the advice that we're being given. We've also produced a vaccination roadmap. I'm sure Kuba has probably shared that with you as well, which has really been targeted at state authorities, countries, administrations, governments, to try and encourage them to actually be able to set up vaccination centres in ports and specifically. And it was that model which was used in the US and has been very successful in terms of being able to get vaccinations rolled out in the US. I think we've now got about 75 locations in the US where we're currently able to vaccinate seafarers, and I'd certainly be interested to hear from some of you if you've been able to use those, you know, what your members' views are and your thoughts are on that. We also had a very encouraging discussion yesterday with the UK government. Some of you may know John Cousley from the Department of Transport. He advises us that he is now working with Minister Coots to try to get formalisation of the vaccinations in UK ports. At the moment, seafarers can get vaccinated in the UK ports, whether they're nationals or not, but it's subject to local availability of the vaccines in those locations. But seafarers can, if they're in the UK, in theory, get them. It won't be AZ at the moment because the UK doesn't have surplus AZ at the moment. Sorry, it won't be J&J rather at the moment. It's more likely to be AZ or Pfizer-BioNTech as it currently stands. But the UK is now also going to work with the government of Gibraltar so that Gibraltar can also become a vaccination hub for international seafarers. I'm also pleased to report that thanks to the work of VDR, and I know we've got Dirk Free here, who's sort of half Cyprus Chamber and half VDR, depending which day of the week it is, and a couple of others. There's been some great work done in Germany by VDR to get vaccination centres going in Hamburg Port, and now I believe also in Kiel and Bremerhaven, and that's available for anybody who wishes to use those whilst there's still vaccines available. So that's been good progress. I believe in Italy it's dependent on the region, but certainly in some regions in Italy they're quite open to vaccinating seafarers and not just their own nationals. We're working at the moment to try to persuade the Danish government, who've got surplus vaccines, to offer those to, and we're using the UN agencies to lobby the. I understand we'll get an answer on that in August from the Danish authorities, but hopefully that will be another stock of vaccines that we can get moving. And certainly there are plans in place, if that happens, to get that underway very quickly in Denmark. The challenges appear, no great surprises, to be more in Asian countries. So, for example, Singapore has stated that they are quite happy, in inverted commas, to vaccinate seafarers, provided they're not using their own vaccines. And as we all know from, I think, the conversations we had last time, the only people who can purchase the vaccines are the governments themselves. So one suggestion that we've had and is going to be looked at, and I can't promise anything, so I would appreciate it that it doesn't go outside of this group, is that the UK government are considering whether or not they can send some surplus UK vaccines to Singapore and also to Hong Kong specifically for use to vaccinate seafarers from emerging countries. And that's a discussion which is currently going on behind the scenes. And obviously, if we can make that happen, we will do. So these are the types of things that we are working on. In terms of the COVAX programme, we had tried to get vaccines that way, and initially that COVAX were quite open to it, but subsequent to that, we've now had the third wave. We've also had the India situation where obviously the vaccines which were originally promised to COVAX from India will now not be coming forward, certainly in the near future. So the willingness to help from COVAX is really not there. And we are trying to do everything we possibly can to try and get as many seafarers vaccinated as we can. So it's an ongoing thing. As we hear of stocks, I believe Canada now also is starting to open up for vaccinations. The Philippines, I believe the infrastructure is set up. The only problem is they don't have any vaccines to actually use in that infrastructure. In India, I understand now that quarantine centres are starting to be set up, and I believe from my colleagues in IMEC now that they've now got, I think, 4 or 5 quarantine centres now set up in India, which should hopefully help the number of Indian seafarers potentially being able to join vessels, because obviously a number of countries won't take seafarers at the moment from India because they're frightened of catching the variants. But we have clearly got problems now emerging in Indonesia, and I believe that they've now gone into national lockdown and they've got a lot of problems. So if you're reliant on Indonesian seafarers, there's certainly going to be some challenges there in the next few weeks. What I will do in the chat box is I will put the link to our ICS website, COVID site. All the documents I've mentioned are all loaded up on that particular website. Please feel free to download them, and as and when we produce updates, they will be available on that site as well. With regard to the body results that your members put out, if that's okay, Kuba, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I thought they were quite interesting answers. Shore leave, I think you mentioned about the work that Intertanco's doing. The vaccination task force is also wanting to look into this because we see that there now are calls now from some seafarers who argue that they have been vaccinated and therefore they think it's now appropriate to have shore leave, because they argue that they were denied it because the excuse that we were using before, although legitimate, was that they couldn't actually, we couldn't because they hadn't been vaccinated. So what we're going to be doing is putting out a industry guidance document, and as Kuba said, it'd be entirely up to InterManager as well whether you wish to be promulgating this document or not, but really talking about the types of areas of risk assessment a company needs to consider in terms of deciding whether or not they think it is appropriate to allow for shore leave or not, depending on the location, depending perhaps on the age of the crew, depending on whether or not they've been vaccinated. So there will be a document that really just hopefully formalises that, and will also have a blessing of ITF, so that hopefully we have some consistency and agreement from both sides as to what, if you are allowing shore leave, what the expected rules and processes should actually be. I'm sure none of you will be surprised, but ITF themselves are quite worried about officially about offering shore leave without any protections because they're worried about putting other crew members at risk. So, you know, it's about, I think it's very much about a balance on that. In terms of the question that you have on employment of unvaccinated seafarers, on the website that I'm going to be putting up the address for, we did produce the legal liabilities document, which you will recall, and that touches upon the issues with regard to legal liability issues if you employ seafarers who are unvaccinated, whether or not you can, you know, what you have to do, and obviously the diversity rules and laws in countries about non-discrimination, etc. So that document is also being looked at now. The ICS position on this very clearly is if seafarers are currently in your employment, and it could be against national rules and regulations to force somebody to have a vaccine. However, there is nothing to stop people when they introduce new contracts or people go back to sea for the next time to go on a new contract, and for that contract to expressly state that you would prefer those seafarers to be vaccinated. So we realise there's a hiatus period at the moment, but from a legal standpoint, that's pretty difficult for us to do anything about. But certainly if you unofficially ask me what I would do if I was sitting in the HR director's shoes of any of your companies, one of the first things I would do is make sure I amend my contracts such that I put in a clause in there that unless you're fully vaccinated, you're not, we wouldn't encourage you to come on board our vessels. So that's that particular situation. The vaccination procedures in ports, it very, very much depends. I think we're doing quite well now in Europe. I think the message has got across in Europe, and certainly we've got good support from Justina in the European Commission. Cuba knows her quite well, and she's been helping us try to get that message across to EU countries, and I think that's been quite successful. Clearly, we're making traction in the US and Canada, and now in the UK. But we clearly have problems in Asia, and given that the majority of seafarers now come from Asia, this is something whereby we really have to push now to try and get port state action, because we're just not going to get it in the immediate future in labour supply countries. What else? I'd be quite interested to hear from yourselves as to what sort of pressure points that you're getting. Are you, for example, getting demands from your charterers that in order to be willing to charter a vessel, they're demanding that seafarers have been vaccinated or not being vaccinated in ports, or, you know, are there restrictions being placed on you and the contracts that you're signing? Is anybody actually asking you in a specific country saying to you, we will accept seafarers if they've been vaccinated with vaccine A but not vaccine B? Those sorts of things is important information for us to have, because we can then take that up with the respective UN agencies to try to get that sorted. The WHO position is very clear on this. WHO have the list of EUL authorised interim vaccines. So their position is if anybody's got an EUL vaccine, that's okay. But then there's a political side of it, which I understand that both Sputnik and the Chinese vaccines are not on the WHO list, and that both of those countries, as a consequence, won't accept WHO approved vaccines. So we're in a, we're in that sort of situation. But from where we're coming from at the moment, if you're hitting particular roadblocks because of particular countries saying they're not accepting particular vaccines, that would be really helpful to us, and we can certainly raise that up the food chain. So hopefully I've given you some food for thought to stimulate what I hope will be an informative discussion from your side. And rest assured, if I can't give answers today, I will come back to Cuba and we'll get those answers back to you. Thanks, Cuba.
Thank you, Natalie. That's a very good roundup of what has been happening over a few months now. Mark, over to you, and I will be a traffic warden. If I see hands up, then I will try to stimulate the discussion and direct it over. So, Mark, over to you.
Yeah, let's try. I would suggest that we try and limit our ambitions to a few fairly distinct points, and the first is whether or not we encourage vaccination. My own personal view from Colombia's perspective and personally is that we should encourage vaccination, but at the same time recognize that it is individual choice. And I think that sort of ticks every logical and sort of moral box that needs to be ticked, and is eminently sensible position to adopt, I think. The second point is the question of shore leave. And here, our view, for what it's worth, is that shore leave should not be allowed as a matter of course yet. It's just too early. I mean, when you look at the global situation, it is simply too early to allow shore leave as a matter of fact, and to leave it to a risk assessment encourages not only potential criticism from our clients, and we are a service provider and our clients expect uninterrupted service of their vessels, but also, as importantly, allows for huge disappointment from the crew. I've been called by many of our crew members who have said, look, you know, I'm vaccinated, I should be allowed to go ashore. And you know, you have on the one side the risk assessment, well, is it actually safe? And on the other, well, what about your colleagues on board who are not vaccinated, and you can bring it back on board and therefore not only infect your colleagues but also interrupt the service which the clients are dependent. So unless in exceptional circumstances, we take the position that shore leave per se is not allowed, and that avoids disappointment and avoids a whole avalanche of legitimate questions from crew and huge disappointment when the risk assessment turns against them. Much better to be clear. You know, no one can. There are very few jurisdictions in the world where you can say it is safe. And the risk assessment potentially exposes us not only to our clients' criticism, but also to our criticism of the crew. And then on employment, I think Natalie's position is absolutely must be correct and is quite simple. You know, we can't require existing seafarers to be vaccinated. We can't require them. We can encourage, but for the purposes of new contracts, yes, there is no reason why we shouldn't insist upon vaccination in the same way as we do for other viruses. However, there is a caveat, and I think we should also, as an association, recognize that there is a need to address the issue of living and working with COVID for the foreseeable future, because it is a fact that now, never mind how much we educate our seafarers, about 20 to 30% of them will not be vaccinated. They will choose not to be vaccinated. We can't operate as an industry without that 30%. So it doesn't matter whether we encourage now and or insist upon new contracts. Without that 30% seafarers, we can't operate because the seafarer pool is already strained. So we need to address, as much as the whole issue of vaccination and shore leave and all of these good topics, living and working with COVID for the foreseeable future, because the chances are we will have vessels with vaccinated and non-vaccinated seafarers on board for a long period of time. So I think those distinct, you know, what is our position on vaccination, encouragement, the issue of shore leave, which I think we open up a Pandora's box if we leave it to a risk assessment at this moment, although our ambition should be to move towards that. Employment is a rather easier one, and then life after or living with and working with COVID, I think, which is as important as this whole issue of vaccination. That's just my 4 pennies worth.
Okay, very good. And I am looking for yellow hands. Anybody who would like to participate in the discussion, please. Rajesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment regarding the changes to the contractual agreement to include the requirement for the vaccination. I think just on a practical sense, as we know that we are already, the industry is bracing itself for the shortage of seafarers, and then on top of that, you don't want to, cut yourself with another wound of mandating COVID certification, because that your pool of seafarers then diminishes further. So I think on a practical sense, even if you wanted to put it on the Seafarers Agreement, you cannot do that, and you cannot do certain ranks, vaccination and others are allowed only with vaccination. So I think that's a practical viewpoint that's which will keep many of the managers not to include it in the Seafarers Agreement. I mean, that's again part of the risk assessment as well.
Rajesh, thank you. Thank you for that. If I may just drop something, we have been contacted by many companies, and I'm using the word many, who have surplus of seafarers, and they are very happy. And I asked the question, there was a first vaccinated seafarers from Philippines. I could not believe that. I went and checked and double checked. Yes, Filipinos vaccinated are ready to join the ships, and they are in limbo. They are waiting. So maybe if you are really facing a seafarer shortage, get in touch with me. We've got pool of masters, second engineers. The CVs are piling. These guys are unemployed. So I am having a problem to reconcile quotes from some of our members that there is a shortage of seafarers, while we have plenty of seafarers, and not only individual, but companies saying, and they will be presenting, by the way. We get to the point that few of our members would love to sell you their product, which is Seafarers. They are happy to do that. So Rajesh, if you are struggling with Seafarers, members of InterManager would help. They have pool of officers and ratings who are happy to address this issue. Natalie, please.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to come back to points raised both by Mark and by Rajesh. Again, really in relation to the challenges of, whether or not you've got enough people in the pool, etc. And it seems to me that I understand those issues, but you're going to create a problem for yourselves if you allow people on board in a year or so's time who have not been vaccinated. Without any question, countries, and I'm talking about port states here, will have requirements if you want to be able to get people to move from A to B and to take flights and all those sorts of things. It's going to become more and more of a mandatory requirement, whether we like it or not, whether we lobby as an industry. It will be a global decision that people will not be able to do that. So that if you allow your seafarers to go, you've got to figure out how you're going to be able to get them back home again. And I flagged that up because we currently, for example, have some severe problems. I'm sure Dirk's aware of Kiribati seafarers at the moment who are not allowed to go back into Kiribati and who've been waiting for over 2 years to be able to go back home because of the risks to health in that country. And so it's just going to get worse. And the point I'm trying to make is that we can do something about it before seafarers join the ships to a certain extent. What we can't do is do something about it when they're on board those ships and we can't get them vaccinated elsewhere. So please really think about that. Understand the issues you're going to face in 8 or 9 months down the road if you don't get your seafarers vaccinated before they leave their home locations. But I see Rajesh wants to challenge what I'm saying, and I'm sure Alistair does as well.
Yes, Rajesh and then Alistair, please.
Yes, Natalie, I do take your point, and I think the position that we are, for us, recommending vaccination is important. You talk about 8 months from now. I'm worried about the next coup change that is on our heads. So I think these are practical challenges on the ground that I'm talking about. Cuba mentioned abundance of seafarers. He's right, absolutely right. There is abundance of seafarers, junior ranks, abundance. I think where we are missing the point is good seafarers. Unfortunately, we had a bad experience in Philippines. Again, it's not that something the market is not open. So I think there's a big difference between a seafarer and a good seafarer. Now, what I feel is there's a big disconnect at the top policy level. One way we are saying, human rights protection, they have all the human rights to not to get vaccinated. We cannot force them, blah, blah, blah. I get that. But then we are turning the screws back on them, saying that, okay, we're going to get you vaccinated by, not allowing you to travel, not allowing you to, come through the airports and things like that. So I don't understand how, one way you're trying to promote the humanitarian freedom and access to human rights, and at the same time, you're going to start turning off, their accessibility.
Sorry, can I just clarify? It's not us who are doing this. This is the countries concerned. We're doing everything we can to try to get those countries to be willing to facilitate. But this is beyond us, and it's beyond the maritime directorates. This is the health directorates in the countries concerned. And this is not just unique to us either. This is also affecting the road sector, the airline sector, the rail sector. This is a global problem now, and it's not going to go away. And I hear what you're saying, Rajesh. Sorry to get on my high horse, but I hear what you're saying about the situations now. But we had the same discussions well over a year ago when we had the crew change crisis, and we're still very a year on. And I hate to tell most of the people on this call, we're going to be in this situation for about another 5 years. Don't expect that situation to improve. There's going to be long-term effects of this and getting this moving. So if we don't start planning now, we are planning to put ourselves in an extremely vulnerable situation in 8 months' time if we just say, oh, well, my problem's about today. Yes, of course, we've all got day-to-day survival problems, but we also need to think about the bigger picture as well. And if we don't, we do that at our detriment.
Natalie, thank you. And I think what I would like to reinforce as well is not us and them. There isn't us and them. Natalie and myself here are representing us, our constituencies, and we are representing it against, if you wish, or within other bigger pictures here. We convey the message back, and we do that because we want all of us to understand what is the environment. And I'm sure you get it. So, and now for the sake of this discussion, Alistair, and then Karsten, and then Dirk. So Alistair, please go ahead.
Yep, no, Kuba, thanks very much. And Natalie, thanks very much. I'm going to agree with what Natalie says. And I think InterManager's, this is a long game. And I think it's inevitable that in time, vaccinations are going to be mandated, as they are for yellow fever, as they are for both in regions of the world and anywhere else. But I agree that we cannot force the colleagues serving on board now who are on contract, who are on board the ship. They have got their human rights. But I absolutely agree with the position that going forward, there's a contractual obligation either to be vaccinated or commit to get a vaccination at the first acceptable and approved opportunity. Because I do think, unfortunately, there are places where even down the line, it may be difficult to get the vaccination pre-joining. My other question to Natalie is there any convention now where a seafarer can be vaccinated in one port and then get the second dose at another port, vis-a-vis UK, then Gibraltar, as long as the vaccine is a recognised WHO vaccine? Thank you.
Kuba, is it okay for me to respond? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for that question, Alistair. Certainly, for example, we know of some seafarers who've been vaccinated, say in Singapore, or whatever, because they're Singaporean nationals, they've had their first vaccine, they then come to the UK and they then had a follow-up jab here. The UK government position is actually, which is quite surprising, if we're giving somebody the second dose of a vaccine, it doesn't have to be the same vaccine that they've had before, provided it comes in the same group of vaccines. And I believe that that's also now what seems to be happening as well in Germany, and is also being looked at in Belgium and the Netherlands as well, generally speaking. But if seafarers get vaccinated in Belgium or in the Netherlands at the moment, they're getting J&J, which is a single dose. Most people in the US are getting vaccinated with J&J, which is a single dose, which is obviously helpful. The other thing I think we all need to factor in is what's going to be the situation with regard to booster jabs? Nobody's really looked at that. We're just still trying to look at the situation of getting people a first round, but we're going to be competing again come the autumn in some major countries, I think, with countries' own booster jab vaccinations, which might make it more difficult. So again, I just urge people to try and get their seafarers vaccinated as quickly as they can, wherever they can now, so that you're not conflicting with national booster jab information. Does that help you, Alistair?
Yes, it does, Natalie. And I think that's the important thing, is there's some convention where if they can't get J&J or a one-shot jab, they can at least get the course of the vaccine in different countries, and that is then recognised globally.
I don't know, Kuba, I'm sure you have, but our colleague Jason Zuderma from the International Christian Maritime Association has done some really fantastic work. He led the NAMA efforts to get the US ones. He's now put together a database. I don't know if you've shared this with your members, Kuba, of as we get to know of locations globally where vaccines are being administered. So Kuba should be able to give you all the links to that site, and as and when we know of new locations offering vaccinations to seafarers, they're uploaded, and it also specifies what those vaccines are. And most of those locations, the vaccines are free of charge for seafarers as well. So hopefully that helps you with your planning.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, one thing from me adding here, because this was discussed indeed, and what seafarers are saying now, so some of our members are reporting that seafarers are very reluctant themselves to be vaccinated with different vaccine. On the individual level, they are not so keen. And I think that's the role of us, educating and showing them it's okay. And Natalie, in fairness, we only recently heard it from Rob, something like 4
Yes, we did. And when we produce the next vaccination leaflet, which should be coming out in September, that will be one of the things that we will be looking at, whether or not we can officially now say that that's okay to do. But certainly that will be one of the things we'll be looking to put into the update if we are it's then considered to be okay to do so by WHO. So we just need to make sure that what's happening on some country levels is also something which is internationally advocated.
Okay, very good. Karsten, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Kuba. Also, thank you to Natalie. Natalie, you actually mentioned something interesting, because you said this is not a problem actually which we are having in seafaring. This is also for airline industries, this is for railroads, this is trucking and so on. Do we have any idea, for example, how the airlines are handling this with regard to vaccination, if this is becoming mandatory and so on? Because this will give also a hint with regard to the international handling of this one. The other thing, maybe one further thing, I find it quite interesting. I mean, the mandatory vaccination actually is coming up only the last weeks. Before, it was always a thing actually which nobody really touched. Now we have France actually coming out and saying, okay, we do it with regard to health. I think the same is true for Greece. And we have other countries which are coming up. So we see that even in certain other industries, this is becoming a mandatory thing. And they even go so far that they say, if you don't do that, you are not allowed to work there anymore, and you also don't get paid. So I think this is anyhow an evolving thing, and the mandatory vaccination will become, let's say, more usual in the next few weeks.
Natalie, quick, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Karsten. In response to your first question about the airlines, because of the frustrations of a number of different different transport sectors, we are now looking at a campaign to be launched in the autumn, where we are going to be working with the road, rail, airlines and the other sectors to really talk about the whole issue in terms of logistics chain. On the whole issues of health and how we can't go on about this. So I know that Mark was talking about, living with COVID. It's very much in the spirit of that. Is that campaign will be about, we can't continue to go on the way we are. We have to have some special provisions now put in place for the transport sectors. We have to have some consistency in the way things are applied, and we have to have some support globally to get those transport workers vaccinated, support, infrastructure and respected. So that will be something to look out for, that will be happening, I believe, in the autumn. So watch the space on that one. And with regard to mandatory vaccines, you're right about Malta, for example. I understand now it has put out a ban on some Brits who've been vaccinated with AstraZeneca because it was produced in India in the same place as Sinovac, and as a consequence, they believe that that's not as good a vaccine because it's come out of India or somewhere else, which is clearly nonsense. And the UK government's trying to work with the Maltese government about this, but we're absolutely getting into territory of national people who think they're being clever, setting up their own national laws and regulations which are not necessarily internationally binding, which is just going to make this even more complex. And this is why I go back to saying this is beyond us as an industry sector, because this affects everybody who potentially travels. It will affect anybody if they've had the vaccine which is not considered to be the right vaccine by a particular person. And it's just going to make it absolutely impossible to be able to affect travel on an effective basis. So certainly our principle is that we have to get seafarers vaccinated, and we have to get them priority to be vaccinated outside of their home countries quickly, and also that they have to have medical care and medical support, which unfortunately we've seen a number of cases again in the last few weeks of seafarers being denied medical care for both COVID and non-COVID related cases, and also denial of repatriation of bodies, which is abhorrent as far as we're concerned, and something which we're pushing quite heavily on. Sorry, Kuba, I probably went on too long on that.
Dirk, please. You're still muted. Dirk, you're still muted. Yeah, no, still muted.
Yeah, better now. We in our industry, we always have the tendency to look at the short-term problems that Rajesh was also referring to. We don't have a solution at the moment for the short term. But as Mark said, and I also fully support what Natalie proposed, we have to look for the long-term solution. And for me, the long-term solution means, to a large extent, vaccination. So don't be too worried or too afraid to look at the employment contract and make it a condition of the employment for the next employment to become vaccinated. I believe this is our responsibility, because we have to protect our seafarers on board as well. And we can't just close our eyes and then send somebody who may be okay or not okay. Sorry, doesn't wash with me. So I fully support the idea to look into the future and look at our employment contracts and say, let's do something about it. Thank you.
Excellent, Dirk. And I think what we're hearing from Mark and Dirk and Natalie now is the note of responsibility. Then we are responsible. Well, I think we are trying to be responsible, and we are not trying to shy away from responsibility. And therefore, we need to make a maybe tough, maybe uncomfortable decision for somebody, but we do. Now, Vikrant, your turn. Thank you for waiting so long.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, Kuba. We have been discussing very recently, and I had given you fleet management's viewpoint. So we are quite pushing all our seafarers to get vaccinated, and exactly like what Dirk is saying, long-term basis, that is the solution. People need to build confidence. Seafarers are vaccinated, so there is a confidence built up in the shipping. On the long-term basis, also there's something that I have a concern about. So a lot of WhatsApp messages where seafarers have been discussing amongst themselves is a whole thing about when commercialization is being talked about, a ship is coming to a port, it's business as usual. But then when we talk about a seafarer to go out for his shore leave, we have so much of restrictions being put up. Totally understandable. That is the scenario right now. But also what like Global Maritime Forum has given, because of the supply chain getting hampered, delays of people getting off the ship or their tenure on board the ship is getting elongated. It is also affecting the mental health of the seafarers also that we need to look at. So something which has come in my mind is a lot of countries have already got a very high level of vaccination rate, like Canada is over 70%, UK, Israel, Italy, Germany. So not putting it in a whole subjectivity of seafarers cannot go ashore, but focusing on main countries where they are forthcoming, they have a very high vaccination rates, and the seafarers also being vaccinated. So it's giving a very, very strong platform then. So there's no risk. We're looking at lower risks then for seafarers then to go ashore, and this is a requirement for a seafarer to go ashore. We may provide them all the facilities on board the ship, but that doesn't 10 months on a ship is quite a long time. So my point is, like, if association can work with these countries where vaccination rates in these countries are beyond 50%, 60%, and in long term, then start easing off the restrictions on seafarers not getting their shore leaves.
Okay, Vikrant, I think what we are seeing as well is something separate. Well, this was flagged up last time when we had a meeting, maybe not this group meeting, but executive committee. There are countries which are actually encouraging shore leaves, but the ship management or ship master is very reluctant. And I think ship master is what I'm hearing today from Mark is precisely what Mark was saying. Then we are responsible for those on board, and country might feel then this is okay and safe to go, but we may not feel safe to go. So there are no further hands up, and I'm glad with that because we only have 9 minutes. Mark, I would like to go back to you. And what do you make out of this discussion now? I've made some comments. Well, some I wrote down, jotted down.
I think
if you need a support, but
Kuba, I think that was a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure it should be, as Natalie pointed out, we're living with this for the next 5 years, so it will be an ongoing discussion. But I do think it's important for InterManager to come out with a position, a present position, which is continuously reviewed, that one, we encourage vaccination, but recognize that it is an issue of individual choice. Two, on employment, that we agree with the requirement of seafarers joining vessels to be vaccinated, although I like Alistair's point, or agree to be vaccinated at the first available opportunity. That releases the pressure valve because these poor guys and girls might not be able to be vaccinated upon joining. So first available opportunity. And then the issue of shore leave, I'm not sure we've reached a position on that. I strongly suggest shore leave is not appropriate yet, because that gives clarity, but will be continuously reviewed on a case-by-case basis as the matter develops, and depending on the status of the vessel. We don't have vessels at the moment where all seafarers are vaccinated. That might change that decision, but if we're talking about mental health of seafarers, not to have a clear position, it is not yet okay for shore leave, will lead to added distress, because they will question who is deciding the risk assessment. Are they qualified? Do they realize what the situation on board? So those would be my 3 suggested bullet points that we come out with, always bearing in mind that we review the situation continuously, and also perhaps with the concluding remarks that we as an association recognize the need to address the living and working with COVID going forward. That remains a vital factor for us. But I think it's important we come out with a position statement.
Thank you. That makes my life much easier, because I'm clearly hearing what you're saying. Maybe if I could suggest, then I put some the wording in what you just said, why we have come up with this position. So for those who are not on a call, and especially seafarers and maybe people on the sharp end, they would understand why we have reached this position. What have been?
Please take a vote on it, because that my analysis of what people are saying may be wrong, and certainly on shore leave, I believe we're not all ad idem, and it is what it is. But I think beware of what you wish for. If we go for allowing shore leave, we're going to have a nightmare in deciding how to apply that, and our clients will not thank us for allowing shore leave and then allowing someone back on board who may be vaccinated to infect the rest of the crew. They will not thank us at all, because at the end of the day, they want to uninterrupted.
Can I just throw a spanner in the works? Just something for you to consider. Mark, I fully understand your situation. The reason we're advocating for there to be some degree of risk assessment is if a complaint is made by a seafarer when it comes to port state control, being told that they're being denied their right under the MLC for shore leave. Yes. And if you can't demonstrate that as a company, then you're potentially
and we had that argument. We had that argument raised. My answer by a crew member who'd obviously been well briefed or done his or her research very well. And my argument was, we do not believe that shore leave is appropriate yet, except in exceptional circumstances, which will be the subject of a risk assessment. So the start position is no, so it's clear, but there will be a risk assessment in exceptional circumstances. So if we're calling into Greenland and there is no cases of COVID, then clearly that might warrant it. But that's your risk assessment element. So, but you need that clarity, otherwise.
I think all I was trying to say, Mark, is that you need to have some clever wording that Kluber can use.
Yes.
Just so that it doesn't leave your members vulnerable when it comes to port state control. That's all I'm saying.
Fully appreciate
it. Natalie, hold on a second, because I've got two hands up. Alistair, please.
Yeah, Kuba, thanks. It's a very interesting debate, and I actually agree with both Natalie and Mark. I don't think it's black and white. I mean, we've got situations where we've got ships sailing in Northwest Europe where the mission to seamen is open ashore within port limits, and therefore is very controlled and is very accessible for seafarers, and we allow them to, and that is shore leave within specified boundaries and is considered safe. If that's considered an extraordinary circumstance because of the level of protection, I'm fine with that. Therefore, I don't think a blanket no is correct. I agree that some clever wording is required.
Thank you. And Björn.
No, I was just saying that I agree with what Alistair said. That's maybe the best angle here. But I was also wondering if you allow the crew to go ashore and they get sick, you end up having the ship quarantined, you're going to have a big debate between your owner and your charterers, very likely. So from a precautionary standpoint, I don't see you having a choice as a manager.
Yeah, and obviously,
one last question: ITF, have they taken a position on this?
Yeah, ITF have. I mean, as I said, they're working with us on this shore leave guidance document. Can I suggest perhaps, Kuba, that we hopefully will have that straw man matured by the end of this week, that maybe you can then run that past your members to have a look at. And I'm very happy to come back in a few weeks' time to have a discussion based around that document specifically, if that's of help to people, because I think it's the whole stance we take on this is quite, as we've discussed, it's quite a complex matter, and it's a matter in its own right, I think.
Thank you. Mark, now, do I understand you well? Then you want me to prepare the summary of today and then give it to the members to be voted on?
Yeah, I think let's vote on encourage vaccination, employment issue in contracts, and then have the fact that, the shore leave issue remains under consideration, because that shows that we are, as an association, we're continually addressing this issue. I don't think we need to wait for the clarity on the shore leave point. As I said, with the rider, or the caveat that we appreciate that living and working with COVID is an ongoing.
Absolutely. I've got my homework. I understand what I'm supposed to do, and I will get it to all of us tomorrow. So that could go back. Obviously, I will rather, Mark, have my document posted by yourself, so you can have a look whether I finally understood and everything is the way we want it, and then we go to the members and get it. Okay, it's 3 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Very
Thanks
heated.
very much.
See, I'm sweating the night that deliver on time, but it's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
you. Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.